"You'll never be on my father-in-law's level," my son declared. His words were a knife in the back after I'd secretly funded his life for 3 years. "Then I hope he's paying your bills," I shot back, my voice like ice. "Because you're not getting another dime from me." His wife froze. "What money?" "We haven't received a penny from you." The room fell silent. She had no idea about the $75,000 I'd sent him, or the dark addiction that money was funding. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My son Mark raised his wine glass, the crystal catching the warm light of the dining room chandelier I'd installed myself 20 years ago. "To Richard," he said, his voice booming with an admiration he never used for me. "He just closed a massive deal with a shipping conglomerate in Asia. The man's a true visionary." Sarah, my daughter-in-law, beamed at her husband. "He's incredible. The way he sees the global market. It's a whole different level of thinking." I forced a smile and took a slow sip of my own wine. The evening had started so well. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air, a familiar comfort in the house I'd built with my own hands here in Denver. The oak table we were sitting at, I'd crafted it from a tree that had fallen on the property during a storm, its surface smooth and solid beneath my calloused fingers. Every corner of this house told a story of labor, patience, and love. But my son's focus was elsewhere, on a world of conference calls and logistics charts, a world that belonged to his father-in-law, Richard. "His company is expanding into 3 new states by next year," Mark continued, leaning forward with excitement. "He's creating a real empire, something that will last for generations. He's even talking about grooming me for a senior management position." That's wonderful, honey," Sarah said, her hand resting on his. I wanted to be happy for him. A father should be proud of his son's ambition. But the words felt like tiny stones being thrown against the sturdy walls of my life's work. I ran a custom carpentry workshop. I didn't build empires. I built heirloom furniture, kitchens where families would gather, bookcases that would hold their stories. I created tangible things, things of beauty and function that I could touch and see. "Your father works hard too, Mark," Sarah said, glancing my way, perhaps sensing the shift in the room's temperature. "Of course, Dad's amazing," Mark said quickly, a placating tone in his voice that was almost worse than the initial slight. He gestured around the room. "I mean, what he does is incredible. It's an art form, really." He paused, searching for the right words, and found exactly the wrong ones. "It's just on a different scale, you know? It's wonderful, but it's small." Small. The word hung in the air, sharper than the edge of any chisel in my workshop. My entire life's work, the sweat and sawdust of 37 years dismissed as small. I looked at my hands, resting on the edge of the oak table. They were hands that knew the language of wood, that could turn a rough-hewn plank into something of lasting beauty. They had built this house, cradled my son, and provided for my family. They were not small. "He just means the business model, Dad," Mark added, completely oblivious to the wound he just inflicted. "Richard thinks in terms of global systems. He doesn't get bogged down in the little details." The green beans I had carefully steamed suddenly tasted like ash. My jaw tightened. I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing this meal, hoping for a simple, peaceful evening. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a piece I'd spent 6 months restoring, ticked steadily, each second a reminder of time I would never get back. "Richard is building an empire," Mark declared, spearing a piece of potato. "Real legacy stuff. That's how you truly make a difference." The napkin in my lap crumpled under my grip. Legacy? Was a home where a family grew up not a legacy? Was the chair a grandfather reads to his grandchild in not a legacy? Apparently not, compared to moving boxes around warehouses. "Richard offered me the regional manager position," Mark continued, his chest puffing out with borrowed pride. "Says I have natural leadership potential." Natural leadership? I almost laughed. If only Richard knew where that potential had been leading him for the past 3 years. I set down my fork, the metallic clink, loud in the growing quiet. "It must be nice," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "having someone who believes in you that much." Mark missed the edge in my voice entirely. "That's just Richard. He's a natural mentor. Some people have it, some don't." The implication was clear. I didn't. The clock ticked louder. The quiet hum of the furnace kicked in, trying to warm a room that was rapidly growing cold. Even Sarah seemed to sense she'd wandered into dangerous territory, her smile looking frozen on her face. But Mark, flushed with his father-in-law's praise and his own imagined importance, couldn't leave it alone. "Face it, Dad," he said, his voice growing louder, more confident, seeking to finish a point no one had asked him to make. "You'll never be on his level." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. A profound, hollow coldness spread through my chest. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor I had installed myself, the sound a raw scream in the sudden, absolute silence. I stood there, gripping the back of my chair, the polished wood digging into my palms. Mark's face, flushed and triumphant, seemed to blur. The sounds of the dining room, the ticking clock, Sarah's sharp intake of breath faded into a dull hum. In their place, another scene rushed forward, sharp and clear as the day it happened. 3 years ago. Mark wasn't sitting at my dining table, but across from my cluttered desk in the home office. He hadn't looked arrogant then. He'd looked ashamed. His hands were clasped tightly between his knees, his eyes fixed on a knot in the hardwood floor. "Dad, we just need to get through this month." His voice had been smaller then, laced with embarrassment. "Sarah had this unexpected medical bill, and my paycheck got delayed. It's just a perfect storm." A medical bill. The words sent a jolt of fatherly concern through me. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. My son and his wife needed help. That's what a father did. I'd opened my checkbook and written out a check for $2,000 without a moment's hesitation. "This is just a one-time thing," he'd promised, folding the check into a neat square. "Just until I get back on my feet. I'll pay you back as soon as things settle down." I had waved his words away. It wasn't a loan. It was support. Family helps family. 3 months later, he was back in that same chair. This time, it was the transmission on his car. A vital repair, he'd explained, or he wouldn't be able to get to work. His stories were getting more elaborate, his explanations more desperate. "Sarah doesn't know how tight things are," he'd whispered that time, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I don't want to worry her. You understand, right? Man to man." I understood. I understood that my son was struggling, and was too proud to let his wife see it. My heart ached for him. It was the same pride I'd had at his age, the burning need to be seen as a capable provider. So, I opened my checkbook again. $3,000. As I handed him the check, he gave me a look of profound relief, a look that melted away the flicker of doubt that had begun to form in the back of my mind. He was my son. Of course I would help him. The memory of that second check faded, only to be replaced by a dozen others, a montage of escalating desperation. By the fourth visit, it had become a grim routine. Mark would call first, testing the waters. "Hey, Dad, could we talk sometime this week?" Then he'd show up with another crisis, another fire that only cash could extinguish. I started keeping better records. Not because I didn't trust him, or maybe because a part of me was afraid to admit I didn't, but because the amounts were getting larger. $2,500 one month, $3,200 the next. I told myself I was just tracking it to help him see the pattern, to help him budget. The excuses grew thinner, vague mentions of cash flow problems and unexpected overhead. To make it easier, and to keep Sarah from accidentally seeing a check stub, we switched to quiet online transfers. From my business account to his personal one, every month like clockwork. Family support, I labeled them. The innocent words a mask for the enablement system I was building. The last conversation echoed loudest in my mind. It had been just 3 weeks ago. He'd needed $2,800 because his rent had gone up. "Richard is really helping me with the big picture career stuff," Mark had explained over the phone, his voice earnest. "But we just need some help with the day-to-day until my promotion kicks in." Richard was helping with his career. I was helping with everything else. The memory shifted one last time, to a night just last week. I was in my office, long after the workshop had gone quiet, staring at 3 years of bank statements spread across my desk. With a heavy heart and a calculator, I did the math. The final number stared back at me from the small screen, stark and unforgiving. $75,000. My sweat, my labor, my careful savings, Money I'd earned hauling lumber and breathing sawdust, working 14-hour days to build something lasting. All of it had vanished into whatever black hole my son called his temporary setbacks. The flashback dissolved. The face of my desperate son from the memories was gone, replaced by the arrogant man sitting at my table. The man who had taken $75,000 from me, and then had the gall to tell me I would never be on his hero's level. The hurt from the past week's discovery now fused with the fresh sting of his insult, forging something new inside me. Not just sadness, not just anger, but a cold, hard resolve. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air feeling cool in my lungs. I was no longer a wounded father. I was a man who was about to take back control. Sarah was staring at me, her eyes wide with concern. "David, are you all right? You look pale." I let go of the chair, my hands steady. I looked past her, my gaze locking onto my son. "Simple question, Mark," I said, my voice even and deadly quiet. "When Richard stops being useful to you, when the job doesn't work out the way you planned, who's going to pay your bills?" Mark blinked, some of his smugness faltering. "Dad, what are you talking about? Because I won't be sending you any more money." The words landed with the force of a sledgehammer. Mark's face went white, then a blotchy red, then white again. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate, the sound echoing in the silence. "What money?" Her voice was a cracked whisper of confusion. "David, we haven't received a penny from you." The silence that followed was beautiful. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The grandfather clock ticked louder, marking each second of his panic. "Mark," Sarah turned to her husband, her brow furrowed. "What's he talking about?" Mark's hands were shaking now. He reached for his water glass, his knuckles white. It's not what you think, honey. It's a misunderstanding." "What's not what I think?" Sarah's voice rose sharply. "Your father just said he's been sending us money." "What money, Mark?" I crossed my arms and waited. This was it. 3 years of careful lies were about to unravel in the span of 30 seconds. Mark looked at me desperately, his eyes silently begging me to let it go, to preserve whatever dignity he had left. It was the same look he'd given me as a child, when he'd broken a vase and hoped I wouldn't tell his mother. I felt no pity. I spoke directly to Sarah, my voice calm and conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I've sent him $75,000 over the past 3 years, Sarah, for various emergencies." Her gasp was a raw, wounded sound. 75? What? She looked from me to her husband, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Her trust in him was visibly shattering, right there at my dinner table. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. She didn't yell. Her voice had gone deadly quiet, which was far more terrifying. "Mark, where did $75,000 go?" Mark's mouth worked soundlessly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. He was trapped between his wife's righteous anger and my cold, unyielding silence. "It's complicated," he finally stammered. "There were some investments that didn't work out." "What investments?" I kept my voice level, curious. Sarah's face went pale. "Trading? Since when do you know anything about trading?" Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "I was trying to build something for us, for our future." "Look at me," Sarah commanded, her voice like steel. "Look at me and tell me the truth." Mark finally met her eyes, and whatever was holding him together snapped. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "It wasn't trading." "Then what was it?" she pressed. The words tumbled out in a desperate, shameful rush. "Poker sites, online casinos. I thought I could win it back quickly. I thought I could double it, maybe triple it, give you everything you deserved." Sarah stepped back as if he'd physically struck her. "Gambling?" The word was a breath of pure horror. "You've been gambling with our future?" "It wasn't supposed to be gambling," he whispered, his own delusion sounding hollow even to him. "I had a system." $75,000. Sarah's voice rose, bordering on hysteria. "How long has this been going on?" 2 years. Maybe 3. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the sound of a heart breaking. "You don't even know how long you've been lying to me." She turned away from him, and grabbed her purse from the counter where she'd left it. I'm done. I'm done with all of this. Sarah, wait, Mark pleaded, stumbling as he tried to stand. We can work this out. She didn't turn around. Work what out, Mark? The lies, the addiction, the fact that you've been stealing from your father for 3 years? That was when I stepped in. Figure out your own problems, Mark, I said, my voice calm and final, but not in my house. He stared at me, his face a wreck of disbelief. You're throwing me out? You threw yourself out, I replied, the moment you chose gambling over family. Sarah was already at the front door. She didn't look back as she walked out into the night, closing the door softly behind her. Mark stood in my hallway, his world completely shattered, a pathetic, broken man. I closed the door behind my son, the click of the lock echoing through the empty house. The silence that rushed in was heavier and more profound than any noise. For a long moment, I just stood there in the hallway, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock. It was the only sound left. Slowly, I walked back into the dining room. It looked like the aftermath of a storm. A chair was pushed back awkwardly. Napkins were crumpled on the floor, and the plates of roasted chicken had grown cold. Witnesses to a family's implosion. I looked at the mess and felt a deep, hollow sadness wash over me, extinguishing the last embers of my anger. This was my home. This was my family, and it was broken. My first instinct was to sit down, to pour a glass of whiskey, to let the weight of it all crush me. But then I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a builder, a man who fixed things. Leaving a mess, letting things stay broken, it wasn't in my nature. Methodically, I began to clear the table. I scraped the uneaten food into the trash, the wastefulness, a quiet metaphor for the last 3 years. I stacked the plates, the good china we only used for special occasions, and carried them to the kitchen sink. As the warm water ran over my hands, a sense of clarity began to cut through the grief. For years, I had been trying to fix my son's problems with money, applying a bandage when what he needed was surgery. Every check, every bank transfer, had been another dose of poison, weakening him, enabling his deceit. My help hadn't been help at all. It had been fuel for the fire that was consuming his life. The anger was gone, but the resolve I'd felt earlier had now settled deep in my bones. I would not let my son destroy himself. But I also knew I couldn't keep trying to fix this the wrong way. I needed a real plan, a foundation built on truth, not lies. And for the first time I admitted to myself that I didn't know how to build it alone. I dried my hands and walked into my study. I picked up my phone, my thumbs scrolling through the contacts until it landed on a name I hadn't called in months, but a name I had trusted for 40 years. Frank. He ran an auto shop over on Colfax. He was a straight shooter, a man who understood the difference between helping someone up and preventing them from learning how to stand. He would tell me the truth. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment before I pressed call. Frank picked up on the second ring, his voice a familiar gravelly bark over the sound of an impact wrench in the background. Frank's Auto. What's the problem? Frank, it's David. The noise in the background stopped. Dave, you sound like hell. What's going on? And so, I told him. I laid it all out, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of frustration and grief. The dinner, the constant praise for Richard, the insult, the $75,000, the gambling confession, Sarah leaving, me telling my own son to get out. When I finished, the only sound was the faint hiss of the phone line. Frank was silent for a long moment. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. When he finally spoke, his words were blunt. Took you long enough. What? To cut him off, Frank said. Dave, we've been friends since high school. I've seen you pour your soul into that kid, and I've seen him taking you for granted for years. This isn't new. I leaned my head against the cool wood of my desk. I thought I was helping him, Frank. Listen to me, he said, his voice serious. I had a cousin, Jimmy. Got hooked on painkillers after a construction accident. My aunt, his mom, she kept helping him, paid his rent, bought his groceries, gave him cash whenever he asked. She thought she was being a loving mother. You know what she was doing? She was making it easy for him to stay an addict. He never had to hit rock bottom, so he never had a reason to climb back up. He lost everything anyway. The story hit me like a punch to the gut. It was my story, just with different names. You did the hardest thing a father can do tonight, Frank continued. You loved your son enough to let him face the consequences. Cutting off the money is step one, but you gotta have a plan for what's next. He needs real help, a professional, not your checkbook. The conversation didn't last much longer, but when I hung up, the weight on my shoulders felt different. It was still heavy, but it was no longer the crushing weight of confusion. It was the solid weight of purpose. Frank was right. This wasn't the end. It was the first step. I turned away from my phone and pulled an old, leather-bound address book from my desk drawer. I flipped through the worn pages, past the faded ink of names and numbers from a lifetime of connections, until I found what I was looking for. Under M, a neat professional entry from 15 years ago. Susan Miller, attorney at law. I stared at the number, my plan now crystal clear. 2 days later, I found myself on the 15th floor of a glass tower downtown, the panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains a stark contrast to the closed-in, personal nature of my problem. Susan Miller's office was nothing like my workshop. It was all polished mahogany, leather chairs, and the quiet, efficient hum of success. It felt like a different world, which was exactly what I needed. "David, it's been too long," she said, standing to greet me with a firm handshake. Her expression was warm but professional, though I have to say, your call sounded urgent. "It is urgent," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. I didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the facts with the same precision I would use to describe a set of building plans. My son Mark has a gambling addiction. I recently discovered he's gambled away $75,000 of my money over the past 3 years. I've been enabling him, and it has to stop. I need to change my will. Susan's eyebrows rose slightly. She reached for a legal pad, her movements measured and deliberate. "Money you gave him directly?" "Monthly support payments. He claimed he needed help with expenses. Turns out he was feeding an online casino habit." She wrote a few notes, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to genuine concern. "What kind of changes are you considering?" Here it was, the heart of my plan. "I don't want to cut him out completely, Susan," I said, leaning forward. "I want to give him a reason to get clean, a real one. I want to make his inheritance conditional on him getting professional help." Susan leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the pad. "That's possible," she said thoughtfully. "Colorado state law allows for performance-based inheritance terms, provided they're specific, measurable, and not against public policy. We call it a conditional will." Relief flooded through me. "What would you recommend?" "Completion of a certified addiction treatment program would be the most defensible requirement," she explained. "Inpatient rehabilitation, followed by a period of verified abstinence. For gambling addiction, I'd recommend a minimum 6-month program followed by 1 year of documented sobriety verified by a licensed counselor. And if he refuses? Then you designate an alternative beneficiary. Many clients in these situations choose a charitable organization related to the issue." "There's a Gamblers Anonymous Foundation here in Denver," I said immediately. "Perfect," she replied. "That creates a clear incentive structure. He gets help and inherits, or the money goes to help other addicts like him." She made another note. "This is clearly a difficult decision, David. Are you certain?" I thought of Mark's face, flushed with borrowed pride as he belittled me. I thought of the $75,000. "I've been making the easy decisions for 3 years," I said. "It's time I made the right one." I returned to Susan's office 3 days later. This time, she led me not to her personal office, but to a sterile conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The legal documents were spread across the mahogany table, like a verdict waiting to be read. A quiet notary public, a woman named Linda Chen, sat at one end of the table with her official stamp and record book. 2 witnesses, Susan's assistant and a young paralegal I didn't know, waited nearby. The formality felt appropriate. This wasn't a casual family decision, it was a legal restructuring of my life's work. "Before we begin," Susan said, her voice taking on the formal cadence of legal reading, "I want to review the key provisions one more time." She lifted the document. "The inheritance for Mark is contingent upon his completion of a certified gambling addiction treatment program, minimum duration 6 months, followed by 1 year of verified abstinence." If these conditions are not met within 5 years of your death, the estate will transfer to the Denver Gamblers Anonymous Foundation. She paused, then continued. A separate, unconditional provision has been made for Sarah Riley in the amount of $50,000. I had insisted on that part. She was innocent in all of this. Linda, the notary, looked up from her paperwork. Mr. David, do you understand the contents of this document? I do, I said, my voice steady. Are you signing this of your own free will, without coercion or undue influence? I am. Susan handed me a heavy black pen. As I stared at the signature line, I thought about the house I'd built, the business I'd grown from nothing, the legacy I'd always imagined passing down. All of it now hanging on my son's willingness to save himself. This was the ultimate act of a father's love. Not giving, but demanding, risking his affection to save his life. I signed my name with a steady hand. The witnesses signed in turn, their signatures making the whole thing real. Linda Chen leaned forward, took the document, and applied her official seal. The satisfying thump of the embosser echoed in the quiet room. It was done. Irreversible. One copy for your records, Susan said, sliding a thick folder across the table toward me. I held it in my hands, feeling the physical weight of the paper that held my son's future. It was the heaviest thing I had ever lifted. The folder from Susan's office sat on my desk, a silent, heavy presence in my study. For 2 days I went about my routine at the workshop, the scent of cedar and sawdust a familiar comfort, but my mind was elsewhere. I was planning, not the dimensions of a cabinet or the joinery for a table, but the careful construction of what would likely be our final family dinner. That afternoon I went to the grocery store. The fluorescent lights felt harsh, the cheerful chatter of other shoppers alien. I moved through the aisles with mechanical precision, selecting the ingredients for the roasted chicken Mark had loved since he was a boy. I chose fresh vegetables, good bread, a bottle of wine. It felt like I was shopping for a last meal. Back home, the act of preparation gave my hands something to do, while my mind rehearsed the phone call. I seasoned the chicken, chopped the vegetables, and set the dining room table with the good china. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to feel like forgiveness, like a return to normalcy. The contrast would make the truth sharper. By 2 o'clock, everything was ready. I sat in my study, the will still in its folder, and dialed Mark's number before I could lose my nerve. He answered on the 3rd ring. Dad? His voice was wary, surprised. Hello, Mark. I kept my tone neutral, almost friendly. If this is about lecturing me again... It's not, I cut in gently. I've been thinking about our conversation, about your money situation. There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear him recalibrating, searching for the trap. What about it? Come to dinner tonight. Bring Sarah. We'll talk. Talk about what exactly? I paused deliberately, choosing my words carefully. Your future. Sarah's future. Your money problems. The shift in his tone was immediate, a wave of desperate hope rushing down the line. Are you saying you'll help us after all? I didn't lie, but I didn't tell the truth either. I'm saying we should discuss it face to face, like a family. 7 o'clock. Another pause then. Okay, Dad. Okay. We'll be there. The relief in his voice was a knife in my own heart. I hung up the phone and looked around the quiet house. The stage was set. The trap, baited with love and false hope, was ready. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my shirt, and opened the door with a warm smile I hadn't felt in weeks, but somehow felt genuine in the moment. Mark and Sarah stood on the porch, looking uncertain but hopeful. Mark held a small bouquet of flowers, and Sarah clutched a bottle of wine like a peace offering. Right on time, I said, stepping aside. Come in, come in. Dad, Mark said awkwardly, handing me the flowers. Thanks for inviting us back. Of course, I said graciously, taking the bouquet. This is your home. The atmosphere felt entirely different from our last gathering. I'd lit a small fire in the hearth, and its golden glow cast dancing shadows on the walls. I served the meal, and for a while we were just a family again. To break the tension, I brought up an old memory. Remember when you tried to help me build that tool shed in the backyard? I asked Mark as I served the chicken. He laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that almost broke my heart. I was 8. That hammer was bigger than me. The whole thing collapsed the next day. Your mother took pictures of you standing proudly next to that crooked disaster. I smiled at the memory. She framed one, said it was the most beautiful shed she'd ever seen because you put your heart into it. I felt so proud, Mark admitted, his voice quiet. Even after it fell down, you didn't get mad. You just sat me down and showed me what went wrong with the joints. You never made me feel stupid. Because you weren't stupid, I said softly. You were learning. Sarah watched our exchange with visible relief, the tension leaving her shoulders. She believed we were healing. They both did. They interpreted my warmth as forgiveness, my nostalgia as a sign that the old man had come to his senses and was ready to open his checkbook again. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly. We talked about small things, carefully avoiding any mention of Richard or financial stress. When we had finished, I stood to clear the plates. Why don't we move to the living room? I suggested. I'll bring in some coffee. It's time we talked. Let me help, Sarah offered, but I waved her away. You're guests tonight. Go on, make yourselves comfortable. They headed toward the living room, their conversation light and hopeful. As I stacked the plates in the kitchen, I took one last, steadying breath. The easy part was over. I joined them in the living room, placing a tray with coffee on the solid maple table between us. They looked hopeful, united, ready to receive my blessing and, more importantly, my financial help. Dad, Mark began, leaning forward slightly, the picture of a repentant son. I know you mentioned discussing our situation. Yes, I said, settling into my armchair. I've been giving it considerable thought. I stood again. Actually, let me get something from my study, something I think will interest you both. I returned with the manila envelope. The moment I placed it on the coffee table, the warm atmosphere evaporated. Mark's eyes fixed on it immediately. What's that? This, I said, my voice now devoid of its earlier warmth, is the result of my thinking. I opened the envelope and withdrew the will, its legal weight silencing the room. I handed the papers to Mark. These documents address your financial future. He took them eagerly, a bright smile of anticipation on his face. Dad, I knew you'd understand. His expression changed as he began to read. The color drained from his face slowly, like water running out of a sink. His hands began to shake. His voice cracked. This can't be serious. Sarah leaned over to read alongside him, her brow furrowing. What is it? He's changed his will, Mark stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I can only inherit if I complete gambling addiction treatment. 6 months minimum in a certified residential program, I confirmed calmly, followed by 1 year of verified abstinence. You can't do this. Mark's voice rose sharply. He shot to his feet, the papers scattering to the floor. This is punishment. You're cutting me off completely. No, I said firmly, my voice cutting through his anger. I'm giving you a chance to earn what you inherit. Sarah knelt and picked up the fallen documents. She read them carefully, her expression shifting from shock to a slow, dawning understanding. When she looked up, her eyes weren't on her husband, but on me. They were bright with something I hadn't expected. Respect. This is exactly right, Mark, she said quietly. He spun to face her, aghast. What? You're siding with him? I'm siding with your recovery, she said, her voice like steel. Your father is right. You need help. Real help. Not more money to gamble away. Mark stared at his wife, then at me, as if seeing us for the first time. He saw not two separate people, but a united front against his addiction. He was completely, utterly alone. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. 4 months after that night, I sat at the same dining room table, but everything had changed. The fire still crackled in the hearth, and the same roasted chicken sat on the platter, but the suffocating tension was gone. In its place was a quiet, fragile peace. Mark sat across from me. This Mark was different. He was thinner, yes, but he looked healthier. The desperate, hunted edge that had defined him for years was gone, replaced by something I barely dared to call serenity. His hands, as he cut his chicken, were steady. He was home on a weekend pass from the Pine Ridge Treatment Center, a facility we had found together after a week of painful, necessary phone calls following that final dinner. The program director says I'm making excellent progress, he said, his voice calm and clear. 3 months down, 3 to go. Sarah smiled beside him, her relief evident in every gesture. She looked at me. He calls every other day now, not for money, just to talk. The simple statement spoke volumes. How are the group sessions? I asked, genuinely curious. Hard? Mark admitted without hesitation. Really hard. You sit in a room with a dozen other people, and you hear your own lies coming out of their mouths. But I'm starting to understand how the addiction works, how it rewired my thinking, made me value a potential win more than the family I already had. We had been having dinners like this, supervised by his counselor at first, for the past month. Family therapy sessions had been brutal, forcing us all to confront years of enabling and manipulation. I understand now why you had to do it, Dad, Mark continued, looking me directly in the eye. There was no anger there, only a profound, weary sadness. I was destroying everything. My marriage, my relationship with you, my future. I couldn't see it. I never stopped believing you could change, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. I just needed to stop making it so easy for you not to. The counselors explained enabling to us. Sarah added softly, how giving you money, David, was actually feeding the addiction. How my own refusal to see the warning signs was a part of it too. Mark nodded, his gaze dropping to his plate. Every time you helped, it just reinforced my belief that what I was doing was okay, because there would always be a safety net. He looked up again. And now I'm learning to build my own. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the man I had always hoped he would become. The pride I felt in that moment was more profound than any pride I'd ever taken in a piece of furniture I had built. This was my true legacy. The financial counselor at the center helped me create a repayment plan, Mark said, his voice steady with a new kind of resolve. It'll take years, but I want to pay back every dollar I took from you. Mark, you don't have to. No, Dad, he interrupted gently. I need to do this, not for the inheritance, but for me, for my self-respect, for our family. Sarah reached for his hand, her eyes shining. We're learning what a real partnership looks like. No more secrets, no more lies. As the evening drew to a close, the grandfather clock chimed 8 times, just as it had on that terrible night 4 months ago. But instead of marking the end of our family, it now measured our healing. When they prepared to leave, Mark stopped in the doorway and turned to me. His eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the tears of shame I had seen before. They were tears of raw, honest gratitude. I was so angry when you showed me that will, he said, his voice thick. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and now I understand it was the most loving thing you could have ever done. If you'd just given me more money, I'd probably be dead or in jail by now. He stepped forward and hugged me tightly, a real hug, the kind we hadn't shared since he was a boy. Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad. I hugged him back, clapping him on the shoulder. Thank you for not giving up on yourself, son. I watched from the window as they drove away, Sarah's hand resting on Mark's shoulder as he drove. They were rebuilding their marriage just as Mark was rebuilding himself slowly, carefully, with professional help and genuine commitment. The will still sat in my study, its conditions unchanged, but I no longer thought of it as a weapon. It was simply what it had always been intended to be, a parent's love expressed through boundaries instead of enablement. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine, unburdened hope for my son's future. Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't to give, but to withhold. For years, I thought I was being a good father by providing a safety net, but I was actually taking away my son's reason to learn how to stand on his own. I learned that true support isn't about solving someone's problems for them. It's about giving them the reason and the tools to solve them for themselves. A foundation, whether it's for a house or for a life, has to be built on solid ground. It cannot be built on a bedrock of easy money and lies. That night, I risked losing my son forever, but in doing so, I gave him a chance to find himself. The journey from that broken dinner table to where we are now was the hardest construction project of my life. It was a slow and painful rebuilding, not with wood and nails, but with honesty and boundaries. Seeing my son take responsibility, Seeing my family slowly piece itself back together, that is a legacy more lasting than anything I could ever build with my hands. If this story of a family's struggle and healing resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd let me know. Every family has its challenges, and sharing our stories is how we learn from one another. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the difficult choices that define our lives. Thank you for listening.